think they got me?
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stones.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
Let's send you out on the right note. PFF sucks. Have a great day, everybody.
Wow.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson, live on YouTube. Today talking NFL offensive line rankings. Sam, how you doing?
Not bad, Steven. Not bad. How about you?
Doing great. Just on the Cape right now and hoping that the internet holds up. Yeah, we're on the Cape of COD. And hoping the internet holds up and the setup holds up a little bit better than your dad's house a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it turns out it's not that easy to get reliable, video-capable internet these days, You go to the back room of the fancy-ass house and the internet doesn't work.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. So we've got a couple things to touch on today ahead of time. We were going to talk a little Hard Knocks, but we figured we're going to save that. There's going to be one more episode to discuss. We'll do it again this week. Programming note this week, because of some high-level, very special PFF live show will be pushed from Thursday to Friday. So we're going to be live on Friday, not Thursday. All right, so just be ready. Pushing it back a day. We'll talk a little Hard Knocks and some other stuff around the league. Talk some training camp battles. Today we're going to be talking about PFF's offensive line rankings all over at PFF.com. But first, Sam, some news over the weekend with Vikings wide receiver Jordan Addison getting arrested for drunk driving a week after his teammate Kyrie Jackson killed in a drunk driving accident. Your initial thoughts on Addison and the reports coming out of LAX?
Yeah, it sounds like he was arrested asleep and drunk or drunken asleep at the wheel of a Rolls Royce overnight or something. So that's like an automatic DWI, DUI, whatever it is. We have this kind of conversation with the Kyrie Jackson thing, me and Trev on the show. Like, it's so easy now to just not drink and drive, to just not get involved in a car when you've been drinking. Like, it's so, and look, you and I are old as hell, right? So we are old enough to have sort of experienced this generational crossover. Like, I don't know if you've seen that video out there from like the 80s where they tried to introduce drink driving laws in Montana somewhere, and people were so pissed off that you couldn't drink while driving, right? That you couldn't have like 2 or 3 beers in the truck with you as you were driving home on your long day at work. Forget seatbelts or anything like that. Like, they were up in arms. This was communism. This was madness, right? So that was like the 80s. Like, I grew up at a time where my generation was probably the first one that got it. That was like, okay, you don't drink and drive. Simple. Just don't do it. Figure out a way around it. Get somebody else to drive. Take the keys off somebody that's planning on driving if they've been drinking. All this kind of stuff. My parents' generation would have been the last one that didn't do that, right? And I knew older relatives that kind of got in the car after drinking at some family event or whatever and drove off. But like, it's been years since, I mean, not to date us, but it's been a while since both of us were young, early 20-somethings, It's been a long time where that's been the standard, that you don't do that. And for it to happen any time now for a young, rich athlete in an organization that has like a 24-hour ride service and you're filthy stinking rich, like you have the money for the Uber, the Lyft or whatever, money's not a factor, that makes it very difficult to excuse. For it to happen a week after one of your teammates died because of a drunk driver makes it pretty much inexcusable, at which point the only thing left, like at that point you're saying this is just abject stupidity and it's disrespectful to Kyrie Jackson's memory. It's completely inexcusable. The only thing you can cling to is you could only say, okay, he must have like a serious problem at this point, right? This is not obviously the first driving-related offense he's had since being in the NFL. He had that thing where he was speeding at like 100 and something miles an hour. If you want to be the most charitable you could possibly be to Jordan Addison, you would say he has some kind of substance problem and needs to get help. And even that doesn't excuse it. That's just like, okay, that's the most charitable explanation, because the alternative is he's just an absolute moron, and this is completely unacceptable.
I mean, obviously not a good decision. And I mean, the only thing to add to yours, I mean, I had a lot. Look, I cringe sometimes thinking about things I thought, decisions I made or my friends made in our 20s, early 20s. However, you know, as a professional athlete, with all those resources that you mentioned, Sam, I mean, it's a decision-making process.
Right.
Even if you want to go drinking or whatever it might be, which might not be a great decision for your career to go out and do certain things. Being able to make better decisions when it comes to, you know, getting home or whatever it might be. So, yeah, not great timing, obviously. I mean, it's never good timing, but we're talking about right on the eve of camp. And then, as you mentioned, right after one of his teammates gets killed in a drunk driving car accident. So, yeah, not great for Jordan Addison. And as you mentioned, the second incident, I don't know if that ends up adding up, if that becomes a potential suspension with the NFL because of it. They kind of pushed the other one aside. He said he had a dog emergency or something.
Right.
That's why he was driving 140. By the way, I mean, unrelated because it's college football, but Georgia football, I mean, when you talk about, are you making decisions that seem so ridiculous on the surface? Georgia's now had about 20 different drag racing incidents since former teammates have gotten killed drag racing while drinking and driving. I mean, so it seems easy on paper to just make better decisions, but Georgia football is going through this right now where they seem to have an epidemic of people just want to race their cars all the time at a ridiculous rate.
Yeah, but this is like, it is inexcusable. Like we're kind of searching around. People are searching around for ways to excuse it. And like, what's the guy's name? The Oklahoma State head coach with the ridiculous hair? Gundy?
Mike Gundy.
Yeah, there you go. Mike Gundy came out with this, like, not quite a justification, but like, who hasn't, done this? And he was trying to like calculate the difference. Like, well, I was thinking, what did he blow relative to the legal limit? And then I was like, well, that's the difference between, and like, stop that now. Like, stop. The legal limit is not there for you to like calculate how many drinks you need to hit it and like run right up to the line and then stop. The legal limit is there simply because you can't have a legal limit of 0 because you're going to blow like, a day later, there's going to be trace elements of alcohol in your system and you're stone cold sober and you just went to jail because there was 0.0003 in your system. Like, that's why the legal limit exists. Just make it simple. If you've had a drink, don't drive. Find somebody else. And this is like, okay, you might not be able to make good decisions when you're 8, 10 drinks in, but you were able to make good decisions before you got to that point. So it's still on you. Like, if you knew you were going out drinking, don't take the car keys. Don't take the car. Find somebody else and say, you're the driver today. I'm going out to get hammered. Don't judge somebody based off the decisions they made when they were 10 drinks in. Judge them on the decisions they made when they were 1 or 2 drinks in and decided to get to this point. So, look, as I said, the only even vaguely charitable way of saying this, which is a complete projection, like, is that he's got an alcohol problem. If he doesn't, then he's just an idiot and is doing this a week after it. Like, he experienced personally the real consequences that this can happen because a teammate of his, albeit a rookie that he might not know, a teammate of his died because of this. Like, come on, we just need to be better at this. It's not that hard.
All right, we're going to get into our offensive line rankings here just in a minute, but we're going to tell you about, and Sam, you get ready to talk about the Discord and Fantasy Football League that we have going on there. But first, as a busy parent, you want to give your kids a head start in their financial future. But investing can often be both confusing and time-consuming. But Fabric by Gerber Life makes it easy for you to set up an investment account for your child that grows with them and helps to prepare for their financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a UGMA account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. UGMA stands for Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. So while your kids can invest while they're minors, the UGMA account allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments more time to grow. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolio is managed by Ford Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Monthly minimum contribution required. Learn more at meetfabric.com. And then, Sam, talk about the Fantasy Football League we have going on over at the Discord, and then we'll get into our O-line rankings.
Yeah, sign up for the PFF NFL Podcast Discord. You can find the link in the description of this show. The guys there running that Discord, they have a fantasy football league that they set up with two divisions, Steve. The Big Goofy division and the Grumpy division. So go get yourself in on the fantasy football. We got a few signups after we mentioned it on last show. I don't know how many spots they have left, but, dive in. Let's go.
I love it. Very on brand for the show. Big Goofy and Grumpy. All right. Offensive line rankings. You were the author of... no, you weren't the author of this one. I pulled out last year's rankings for a minute. You wrote last year's.
For some reason,
those out.
Yeah, for some reason last year's last year's wins the SEO battle. It's still like the top ranked Google thing when you type in PFF offensive line rankings. I don't know. I must have been a superior SEO introduction writer than Zoltan. That's all I can surmise by that.
Got to hit those hot button words at the top. But Zoltan wrote them this year. A little bit about the offensive line rankings. I think as far as criteria, you're always trying to figure out depth, right, of the starting five. I think in some cases you might look at a team like the Browns and say, wow, they've got 6 starters instead of 5. I think that's going to help them. And then I think we always use the phrase, hey, let's creep back toward average. I think that the idea of not having weaknesses on your offensive line should play into this. The other factor, I think, is continuity as well. And, we've seen studies through the years just having 4 out of 5 starters or 5 out of 5 starters, even if they're not the best starters, might go a longer way toward improvement. And we also know, and I like to lean on this, when you've got offensive linemen in years 2, 3, and 4, that is when they tend to make a jump. And you see guys make a jump, and even if they didn't have great production in previous years, you can almost project at least a little bit of improvement over time for some of those guys. So I think a lot of that goes into the O-line rankings. We'll do this the same way we did defensive line a couple weeks ago. We're not going team by team. We're not going team by team. All right, we'll go through the do we have graphics for the bottom few?
So the important thing for this is we'll go sort of team by team in terms of mentioning random teams, the ones that I think have storylines, but we're not going to give the complete rankings out. You can find those on pff.com. One of the things I thought that was interesting when looking at these rankings, remember when we talked about the defensive line rankings and you get all the way down the bottom and you're like, okay, this team is clearly one of the worst defensive lines in the NFL, but it's actually not bad, and only when you're sort of looking at the 1 through 32 of the NFL do you decide the relative strength of that unit in league-wide, right? There have been times where you get to the offensive line and you can go like 10 deep on the offensive line and you're like, wow, there's like 10 really strong offensive lines here. This year, I actually think that, I don't know if the standard has dropped or if it's just at the top. The strength at the very top isn't necessarily where it has been in the past. There's like a couple of really good offensive lines, and then immediately we get into like, okay, it's fine, it's solid. You get into solid territory pretty quickly.
Yeah, so let's start at the bottom, because some of these offensive lines that are listed near the bottom, you're going to have fans saying, well, we added this and we added that. I think what you're trying to describe, or what you might be describing, is there's a little bit of hope for even some of the lower offense, but they have more holes than some of the other offensive lines. So we're going to start from the bottom here. Number 32 is the New Orleans Saints. Number 31 is the Seattle Seahawks. Number 30 is the Tennessee Titans. 29, the New York Giants. 28, New England Patriots. 27, Washington Commanders. 26, Arizona Cardinals. And 25, the Baltimore Ravens. So starting at the bottom there, Sam, with the Saints at 32, I was a little surprised. Look, I know things haven't gone well for them, I think, from a team-building standpoint, in part because Ryan Ramczyk, their starting right tackle, who's a star, is battling potential career-ending injuries. That's a big factor. But when you look at that team, Eric McCoy is a pretty good center, good, dependable center, one of the better centers in the league. But beyond that, they actually don't have any dependable starter once you take Ryan Ramczyk out of the lineup.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, in the article it says this: the Saints line features 4 former first-round picks. Like, this should be a strength of the team. They've actually invested in this group and, thrown draft picks at it and tried to maintain a high level. For a while, the Saints had one of the better offensive lines in the NFL, and they've tried to maintain that. Cesar Ruiz, first-round pick, Trevor Penning, first-round pick. Now you've got Talise Fuanga, first-round pick. Like, this should be a really good offensive line. And to be fair, we haven't seen anything from Fuanga in the NFL yet. He might be a really good player, but Penning has not worked out yet. Cesar Ruiz has not worked out yet. And overall, this line has been dramatically underachieving for a number of years now.
I also just want to get out of the way. I think I'm going to be relying on PFF grades because I trust them, and I believe that they're a good descriptor of what happens. I also believe that they're a good predictor of what's going to happen on the offensive line. But in addition to, hey, context is needed. Sometimes players are in more favorable situations or not. And I just bring that up because of Cesar Ruiz being a guy that got paid by the Saints. They seem to like him. I mentioned at the top that offensive linemen tend to get better in year 3 or 4, and we're heading into year 5 for Cesar Ruiz, and we haven't seen, a grade for him above the low 50s,
right,
or above the mid 50s. So he has not made that big jump, and so he's always underperformed, at least in our metrics, compared to maybe expectations.
So I think it's interesting. Sometimes I think you can get a divergence between PFF grades and like what a coach thinks or what people generally think about a player, and I think sometimes you will explain that away by the injury or the thing that a guy was dealing with in any given year that the outside world doesn't necessarily know about, but 100% affects his play, right? So we might grade a guy badly consistently over a year, and the coach will be like, that guy's a really good player. These guys are out of their mind. But he was playing through, like a bad ankle all year. Because the coach knows that, like, okay, once he comes back next year and he's 100% healthy, that's gone, and he's going to be a really good player again, and his grade will bounce back up to the level it's been previously. But you're right. Where I think we become right, whatever you think about the grade and its inaccuracies and its blind spots, over like 5 years, it's not wrong on an offensive lineman, right? If a guy is grading in the 40s 5 straight years, the guy stinks. It's just a reality. He might have amazing measurables and his highlight reel might be phenomenal, but he's a bad football player. And this has happened multiple times where, players or teams rather have invested in a guy. They've given him a big contract. All the data says this guy's a bad player. Eventually, something changes on that team, whether it's a coaching staff, whether it's they just decide the money's too much. They move on from that player. Invariably, that is the end of his starting time, right? And this happened with the Saints. Cankles, what's his name?
Andrus Pete.
There you
Andrus
go.
Pete.
Andrus Pete. Cankles. Yeah. Andrus Pete. They invested in him. Like, all the data said Andrus Pete was not a good NFL player. And for some reason, the Saints gave him like a big money contract. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Eventually, they're like, all right, we're out of this. And Andrus Pete has not caught on somewhere else to start. Like, that's who he is.
Can't call him Cankles on air. That was a descriptor from some offensive line coach around the league.
It's ingrained in my brain now. His name has been replaced with Cankles.
The Saints' offensive line wasn't great last year. I'm a big fan of Talise Fuanga. I think he's going to be a good player. But we're also talking about a guy potentially moving to left tackle for the season. Trevor Penning moving from left tackle to right tackle. Penning's never really played well at any point in his career. Second-year guard, Nick Saldiveri, perhaps stepping in there as a mid-rounder. So, yeah, there's a lot of question marks. That's the word I'm going to use over and over today. Question marks. Why is this offensive line low? It's question marks. And that's why Seattle's low and at number 31, because we're talking just 2 years ago, they went into the draft, had 2 massive needs at offensive tackle, and seemingly solved both needs with first-rounder Charles Cross, third-rounder Abraham Lucas. And Lucas has battled some injuries and a dip in performance a little bit last year. Charles Cross, I think, is ascending and looking pretty good. So I think they're fine at tackle, but beyond that with Seattle, are they expecting third-rounder Christian Haynes to step in and start? I think he's capable. I'm a Christian Haynes fan. But we're talking about, turnover, Damian Lewis moving on. We're talking about turnover on the interior. And again, question marks. An older Lakin Tomlinson maybe playing left guard. He hasn't played well in a couple of years. And Oluwatimi probably stepping in and taking over at center. Between him and Nick Harris at center, it looks like one of the worst center situations in the NFL in Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, we highlighted that interior heading into the draft, saying it was, a clear, obvious area of need and such an acute need that they almost needed to address it in the first round, where they don't like drafting interior offensive linemen. They waited, they got Christian Haynes, and that's a really good result for them. But it's still like projecting a non-first round rookie in to fix one of three problem spots on your offensive line. And as sort of surprising a package as Abraham Lucas was as a rookie, it's not like he's kicked on and, really become like a top tier player at right tackle. They've basically got Charles Cross, who I think is pretty good at left tackle, Abraham Lucas, who can be pretty good at right tackle, and then three total question marks on the interior, the strongest of whom is Lakin Tomlinson, a former first-round pick, who's only been good in the Shanahan system.
So I think I'll give hope to a lot of these teams. They all have creep back toward average potential, right? If they get those tackles back on board, Tomlinson, creep back toward average candidate. And as I mentioned, Christian Haynes at guard. I mean, they have a chance to have 4 average or better starters. There's just, again, more questions, turnover, new starters, relative to some of the other teams in the league here. So Seahawks at 31. The other one that's probably a tough pill to swallow maybe for the Tennessee Titans and might come back to burn us, Sam, putting the Tennessee Titans at 30, because we know there's probably a handful of game-changing offensive line coaches, and the Titans have one of those in Bill Callahan. So on paper, the Titans look a little bit better, and then from a coaching perspective, throwing Bill Callahan into the mix could improve the Titans, but for now, I think they have to be ranked this low.
I don't know. I feel like this is a bit harsh. I think that they're a better offensive line than this. Now, it does sort of show, this feels a little bit like when Chicago's defensive line got in Montez Sweat, and you're like, okay, congratulations. You bridge the gap between, like, it used to be you out on your own in the ineptitude level and then the rest of the league, and you closed that gap, but you didn't like launch yourself up to average or anything. You're still not good, right? This feels a little bit like that, where the Titans had the worst offensive line in the NFL for the last 2 straight years, and now that should no longer be the case. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you launch yourself into like mid-tier respectability. But I do think there's a chance that they have done that. Like, Cushenberry is now a good center at this point in his career. Brunskill's solid. Peter Skoronski, I think, should be a good player at guard year 2. When we talked about those sort of first-round players and where they projected, one thing we didn't mention that some people pointed out to us afterwards is Skoronski had an appendectomy and lost like 20 pounds in the season. And, you're already trying to adjust to the NFL, a new level of competition, a new position, and now you're 20 pounds down, recovering from an appendectomy in season. You're just never getting that back. Like, that's making you take a step back and preventing you from ever taking the step forward again to get back to where you should have been. I think there's a reasonable chance that Skoronski takes a step forward and is like a good player year 2. And then J.C. Latham, the question mark at left tackle, what he's going to be as a rookie. And then the real... So I think the interior will be solid, right? Which immediately catapults them above teams that we've been talking about already. J.C. Latham is a bit of a question mark, but a highly talented one, somebody that a lot of people loved. And then the real, total question mark is, what can the Callahans do with Nicholas Petit-Frere, right tackle? A guy that the previous regime actually quite liked and, thought had potential, and it's just not worked. Can that level of coaching actually resuscitate his career and suddenly you got 5 solid players, or have you got 4 potentially solid players and 1 problem at right tackle? Either way, I think that's better than, one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL.
Yeah, to me, this is a bit of the opposite of what Seattle has. I agree with you on the interior. Skoronski, Cushenberry, Brunskill, left guard, center, right guard should be solid. The questions are definitely at tackle for the Titans. I like J.C. Latham as a prospect. Goes number 7 overall, but he's moving from right tackle to left tackle. You got to expect some sort of learning curve there. And then Petit-Frere, who you mentioned, hasn't really produced yet. So I think tackle's the bigger issue for the Titans, the opposite of what we've seen from Seattle. So I promised we wouldn't necessarily touch on every team. But the Giants at 29, Patriots at 28, Commanders at 27, Cardinals at 26. out of that group, Sam, I mean, the Giants kind of stand out a little bit to me because they've done work there.
Yeah.
But have they done enough work? Is that ranking justified? A bottom 5 offensive line again for probably the 4th or 5th straight year here. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, they have done work with it, but when you look at what it requires, a lot of projection for this line to not be bad again. Andrew Thomas, I think, is one of the best left tackles in the NFL. He should be good. Jermaine Illuminor is a good offensive lineman. I don't know that left guard is his ideal spot, or even guard, period. I think ideally you kind of want him playing right tackle. But you've got Evan Neal, this big investment in a former top draft pick. You want to give him that shot. John Michael Schmitz was a player that we really liked coming out. The college grading was spectacular. His rookie season was very much not. So he needs a big step forward. And then John Runyon got a sort of free agent investment. I mean, he just hasn't been particularly good in the NFL. So it's an investment. It's probably better than what was there before. I don't know that it's a positive necessarily on that offensive line. So you look at that group and it's all about range of outcomes again. It could be average. It could be, solid enough. On the other hand, it could kind of be what it was last year, which is one good player at Andrew Thomas and then 4 problem spots.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I may have downplayed Illuminor signing this entire offseason a little bit too much. I mean, I know you've been an advocate of Illuminor. He is the guy. That type of signing, $7 million for a guy who's settled in as a good starter over the last couple of years with versatility. Those are the types of signings when we talk about fixing an offensive line. Those are necessary. Those are the things that turn things around. Runyon felt like, okay, again, using the grading as a baseline, mid-50s type of grade, never really been great, was actually rotated in and out a little bit with the Packers. I don't know if he's worth the $10 million. Illuminor signing I like. But you're expecting some development from John Michael Schmitz, and you're hoping and praying for some kind of development from Evan Neal, who's just been well below average over the first couple of years, playing at right tackle.
And Illuminor, like, if the plan is to play him at left guard, that's like the one spot that he hasn't really played in the NFL. Now, he has played there. He's done it in college. It's, and he's been versatile. He's played left tackle, right tackle, right guard. So, but it's just interesting that you would take a guy and literally dial in on the one spot that he hasn't played in the NFL. That's where he's going to go. He's been versatile. Why wouldn't he be able to play that one other position as well? I mean, it's probably true. Like, you take a guy that's got inside-outside flexibility. He's played both sides of the line. It kind of makes sense. Why wouldn't he be able to play that? But it doesn't scream great process to literally let's grab the one position that he hasn't played and pencil him in for that one.
I'll give you at least a nugget on every team, even if we don't get in depth. Patriots at 28 and the Commanders at 27. I mean, the thing that stands out to me there is that's QBs 2 and 3, picks 2 and 3 in the NFL draft. Drake May having O-line number 28 if he becomes the starter for the Patriots. Jaden Daniels having O-line number 27 for the Washington Commanders. We talked about that quite a bit on draft night. Hey, when is Washington going to draft an offensive lineman? Are they going to try to help him? I like that they drafted the best players, didn't force needs. However, they're working with a bit of a makeshift offensive line in some holes there. So I think that affects Jaden Daniels, Drake May, and their potential development as rookies.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like Washington's offense. In fact, both these offensive lines have really fallen a long way as well. The Patriots, used to have one of the better offensive lines in the NFL under Dante Scarnecchia, and just, for years that was the strength of the team, and it's been chipped away at over the last few years. And Washington's as well. It used to be pretty strong, and certainly from a pass blocking standpoint was a really good unit, and now it's really not. Like they're another one. They're one of those classic teams where the most likely outcome for all 5 guys is like average, right? And it's the case. It's like that Buffalo Bills offensive line. It's like where does it hit in their range of outcomes? Because if they all exceed expectations, it'll be pretty good. If they all miss it, you'll be like that year the Bills had where they had actually a problem spot on the offensive line with pretty much the same group that they had the year before.
Arizona Cardinals 26, Baltimore Ravens at 25. A little surprising given the Ravens, or when you trade Morgan Moses for a mid-rounder, try to replace him with a second-round rookie, other turnover, Ronnie Stanley injury. Is it is it fair to have the Ravens here at 25?
I mean, when you trade away the great Morgan Moses, what can you expect to happen to your offense?
Well, listen. You've got the Ravens at 25, and I don't want to give too much away, but the Jets might be top 5 now in these rankings. And all I'm going to say is Morgan Moses leaves the Ravens, they drop to 25, joins the Jets, they jump up to 5. I mean, I'm not overweighing, his value here.
No, not at all. Baltimore had an unusual approach to their offensive line. Like you talked before about how important continuity is on the offensive line, and this isn't just like us talking about it in abstract terms. Like it's been measured. The great late Dr. Eric Eager, currently working for the Carolina Panthers.
Still alive.
Right. He's quantified this, right? There's actually a measurable difference in the continuity on an offensive line. It's important to try and keep that group together as much as you can, and only break it up essentially when it becomes financially untenable to keep them all together. Instead, Baltimore kind of looked at their group and voluntarily blew up what was a pretty solid offensive line this offseason, and have decided to replace multiple players along it. Now, okay, Ronnie Stanley at his best is one of the best pass blocking left tackles in football, but injuries have really taken a toll on him, and he hasn't been the player that he used to be. Can he bounce back? Don't know. I think Patrick McCarry is actually a solid starter at right tackle in the Morgan Moses mold, right? You're not going to be blown away by him. You're probably always going to be looking to upgrade him maybe, but it's not a problem spot if he's my starting right tackle. Tyler Linderbaum is a really good center, and then the kind of question marks are now at guard, where Ben Cleveland is okay. Josh Jones might be slated to step in at left tackle or left guard, and we've talked about him before. Like, he's a guy that only plays well left tackle. It's weird, it's unusual, and it's, I think, annoying for NFL teams who hate that lack of position flexibility. But him at left guard feels unlikely to be a positive.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Cleveland's played all right in limited time throughout his career. He could be fine at right guard. Makari, who you mentioned, if he had to be the right tackle, that's fine. If they get Roger Rosengarten, the second-round tackle out of Washington, if they do get him up to speed right away and he can step in at right tackle that you said Josh Jones doesn't have, Makari could play probably all 5 positions if needed, and has played guard at a fine level and tackle at a pretty good level. If Makari can become the flex player, basically, that makes this line that much better. So I think there's a lot of pressure on second-round right tackle Roger Rosengarten to push everybody down the depth chart a little bit.
This is a fun game in this show because your internet is like functional, but when it drops for like 2 seconds. So you just get like a fill-in-the-blank game. What did Steve say during those 2 seconds? Who knows?
I hope that's not happening on the main broadcast, and it's just you. But we'll see. Because I got you kicking out every now and again as well. San Francisco 49ers are 24, Jacksonville Jaguars 23, Houston Texans 22, Cincinnati Bengals 21, Carolina Panthers 20, and Las Vegas Raiders 19. We'll stop there. Of that group, I think for me, the Texans being at 22, the Niners being at 24, the same old story of they got the Shanahan system. They both had great offenses last year with similar offensive lines. Does this even matter given what they've already been able to produce with similar lines?
Well, this block is all the Shanahan offensive lines, right? It's like where you put these lines that are actually quite bad on paper, but probably doesn't make a difference because the scheme hides it, right? Whether it's Tua Tagovailoa's lightning quick release, whether it's just the work that Kyle Shanahan does with that San Francisco offense, or Bobby's version in Houston.
Yeah, Dolphins are at 18, by the way. I didn't say them. I don't know if I paused. Dolphins are at 18.
Yeah, like none of these,
the other two.
All of those offensive lines seem varying degrees of problematic, and none of it seems to matter. It's fascinating. Like San Francisco, at least, can point to they might have the best single offensive lineman in football and a Hall of Famer in Trent Williams. In fact, each one of them, their strongest player by a mile, is left tackle. And I don't know if that's by design or if that's just the way they've ended up. But Laramie Tunsil is one of the best pass-blocking left tackles in football. Not great as a run blocker, but an elite-level pass protector. And then Teron Armstead, for the 75% of the season you're going to get him, is still a top-tier left tackle. So the best player on all those offensive lines is left tackle. Actually, their best player is an elite-level performer. And then the other 4 spots are various degrees of like passable starter to actually subpar, and yet subpar but hidden by the offense.
The Niners feel like one of those teams where maybe the continuity aspect of it works in their favor, because again, on paper, you're not looking at Aaron Banks at left guard or Colton McKivitz at right tackle and saying, hey, great above average starters, but just putting that group together another year could be helpful to go with. Again, you've got the elite Trent Williams at left tackle. I think the continuity factor might help with the Niners. I also think if you're the Bengals or the Panthers, there's a path to be in bottom 10. I think Cincinnati, am I kicking out again? Is it happening?
Yeah, it was a really bad time for it to happen as well. It's like, this has the potential to.
Cincinnati and Carolina, I think, are closer to the top 10 than they are the bottom 10, or have the potential to be closer to the top 10 than the bottom 10. I think Cincinnati has made a lot of the right moves, including the Trent Brown one-year flyer while Amarius Mims is developing. I think when you're putting this together, having Amarius Mims as your third offensive tackle needs to be factored in here. I think that's huge. They're part of the reason why the Saints are low, or maybe the Titans are low, or they're relying on their first-round tackle to be good right away. The Bengals are not. And then the Panthers investing in Damian Lewis and Robert Hunt. They have a classic creep back toward average play. Same thing at center. They with Austin Corbett, they have three players on the interior that I think can get them back to average. Taylor Moton has been the stalwart at right tackle, and left tackle Ike Ekwonu has shown some improvement after a slow start. So, look, I think the Panthers and Bengals at 20 and 21 on this list have the potential to jump up pretty high by the end of the season if things go well.
Carolina, yeah, I think we're conditioned by how bad that line was a year ago. But if you sort of rewind literally 12 months, like that line should not have been as bad as it was during the season. Like the talent level, the on paper performance of that group from last year should not have been one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. And I think it was impacted by Bryce Young's poor play, by the offensive scheme, by the lack of receivers. Remember the way the Patriots offensive line immediately looked twice as bad as soon as they lost all their wide receivers? And it's like, oh, okay, receivers actually impact the offensive line as well as the other way around. I feel like if the improvements Carolina has made, not just to the offensive line, but to receiver, to coaching, to scheme, like if all of that pays dividends, this line could actually look quite good quite quickly. Like they could jump from being one of the worst in the league to, as you say, like a potential top 10 unit.
All right, let's get through some of the next group here. I mentioned the Dolphins at 18, Tampa Bay Bucks. So this next group of offensive lines, I feel like you're talking about they have one. They just have fewer question marks. We're in creep back toward average territory. And they all have the potential, if that one question mark hits or whatever it might be, to get closer to the top 10, what I just described for the Bengals and the Panthers. Bucks at 17, Rams at 16, Denver Broncos at 15, 14's the Green Bay Packers, 13, the Minnesota Vikings, Los Angeles Chargers at 12, and then Chicago Bears at 11. Who from this group stands out to you here, Sam?
This is kind of like what I was talking about right at the top, where the top 10 may not have the depth that it has in previous years, but consequently it feels like the entire league is in this group. Like what we have actually this year is like a top 3 and then 27 other teams and then a couple more at the bottom, And like, so every team is just kind of stuck in the middle with this offensive line that's got, a really good player, a weakness, and then some average players. And it's all just the distribution of all those types of players. I think I want to talk about the Bears offensive line for a second, because I think that they're an interesting group. I know that they're at the top of this list you just read out on the outside of the top 10, but I think Bears fans think this offensive line stinks, and I think a big part of that is the way Justin Fields played the game. Like Justin Fields, the opposite of Tua, he had the longest average time to throw. And yeah, look, there's a play out there. Is it against Cleveland where Myles Garrett roasts Braxton Jones, and then Justin Fields, like with, unique supreme athleticism, evades Myles Garrett in the backfield, turns it into a positive play. It might have been a touchdown. I forget. Anyway, like turns what is a bad beat on the offensive line into a positive play. Sure, he did that a few times in the season, but I think that's more than offset by holding onto the ball on average almost 4 seconds every single time you drop back. Like, that's getting towards the edge of the time where you stop charging offensive line with pressures, right? The quarterback is holding onto the ball longer than 4 seconds. It's kind of on him at that point, not the lineman. His average was sort of in that area, right? So what I'm saying is I think if you change Justin Fields to almost any other quarterback, you immediately make this offensive line, even if it played exactly the same, look significantly better than it did last year. So that group of Braxton Jones, who I think is a solid, maybe not a spectacular left tackle, Tevin Jenkins, who when he's healthy at guard looks very good, Ryan Bates, Nate Davis at right guard, and then Darnell Wright, who I think surprised us relative to expectations year one. I think immediately, like you look at those numbers right now from last year, the grading, 69, 73, 79, 53, 62. I think just by changing Justin Fields as the quarterback, you can probably bump those numbers up, a few. I don't know how many grading points, but you can immediately bump those numbers forwards. And then you start talking about, well, what will the development be for a young player like Braxton Jones heading into that crucial year 3, Darnell Wright heading into year 2 after impressing year 1. Like, this could be quite a good offensive line, which is where Zoltan has them projected to be at number 11.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, but the original thing you said where, hey, you're basically saying, hey, it's difficult to separate the Bears at 11 and maybe the Dolphins at 18 or a team at 17. I think that's where I am. I'd probably have the Bears a little bit lower there. But everything you laid out, Darnell Wright maybe taking a step forward in year 2. Ryan Bates at center has played some pretty good football throughout his career. But is Nate Davis the only weakness there on this line? As he just regressed over the last few years after coming over from the Titans? I think that's a fair question. But there's so many of these offensive lines in this group where it's like, what's the question? There's only one real question mark. Like, I think the Rams are classic with what they've done this offseason. They're an interesting case just because they're moving Steve Avila from guard to center. They bring in Jonah Jackson. They stole Kevin Dotson in a trade with the Steelers last year where he became the number 2 graded guard last year by PFF grade. Rob Havenstein has been very consistent as a starting right tackle, and the only question you're looking at for the Rams is left tackle, where it's Joe Noteboom and Alaric Jackson maybe battling. So another team where it's like, I think Avila probably makes a pretty good transition to center in year 2. There's some question there, but 3 out of 5 are looking pretty good. 4 out of 5 probably pretty good, and then that one, all right, it's left tackle, brings the question mark, and that puts the Rams dead smack at the middle at 16. And just to make a bigger point, we made this around the draft, are teams doing a better job of team building right now than they did 8 or 10 years ago? It kind of feels like that, and I think the O-line might show that. There are fewer teams that just have crazy on-paper weaknesses in the trenches, and I think they have done a better job, which is why it's probably a little bit more difficult to maybe separate teams 10 through 25 here with the O-line rankings.
Yeah, I don't think the Rams will do this based off just what they've done in the past, but there's actually some pretty solid starting caliber left tackles out there in free agency right now, like that wave that hasn't been signed yet. If the Rams had the same opinion of their offensive line as you and we do, like look to that and go, that's a pretty good group, but man, left tackle's a worry for me. They could fix that tomorrow by signing one of these like clearly upgraded players from Alaric Jackson, albeit for more expense, and sort of throwing maybe $10 million into that for just one season. But like I was actually surprised looking around the sort of available free agents, like left tackle in particular. If you have a problem spot at left tackle, Kansas City, you can fix that like now.
Yeah, I mean that honestly, because we're looking at this from an on paper perspective. If you added a dependable veteran left tackle to the Rams, does that make them top 8, right? Does that immediately vault them? A little bit of projection there again with Avila moving to center, but I think that's worth thinking about if you're the Rams. The Chargers at 12, another interesting team for me, in part because of the scheme change, right? You're going to have this power running attack with Greg Roman, Joe Alt's coming in as a rookie who we expect, as much as you have questions for some of the other first-round offensive tackles, I have fewer questions about Joe Alt pairing with Rashawn Slater to become one of the better tackle duos in the coming years. Playing center. the biggest question probably at guard there, but I think they have a lot of potential to be higher on this list as well.
Yeah, no, I think they do. I mean, that tackle pairing should be really good. You always have questions when it's a rookie coming in, but obviously the better the rookie was in terms of a prospect, the fewer questions or the better you feel about it anyway. So like Joe Alt was a really top tier tackle prospect. You should feel good about him coming in at right tackle. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to play at that level all the time, but Slater is a top tier left tackle. Alt should be solid at right tackle. Bradley Bozeman is a capable starting center. Zion Johnson has been a bit, I think, underachieving so far in his NFL career, like a pretty big prospect, a guy that's flashed really big-time ability. And I know a lot of offensive line, coaches or guys on Twitter, guys like Duke or those types of people like him, like they talk him up quite a bit, but the down-to-down consistency I don't think has been there yet. So, I think Zion Johnson needs to improve, take a step forward if he's to sort of help this offensive line be, a really good group as opposed to just a solid group.
Let's talk Green Bay Packers for a minute because, Sam, I think if we were just trusting the grades or just trusting the data, so to speak, I think the Packers would be lower. But how much are we saying, hey, they've got a history of developing players? Rasheed Walker may not have been a big name, but they may have found their future left tackle there. Zach Tom has been a fantastic player. And I mentioned earlier about, losing, having Sean Ryan taken over at right guard for John Runyon, who's moved on. Ryan had okay production. Josh Myers with okay production at center. We projecting the Packers too high here at 14 overall.
Well, they're also an interesting line because first of all, we've got to figure out what the best five is for this group. Like they drafted Jordan Morgan, the tackle out of Arizona in the first round, and either aren't planning on starting him right away or so they have to decide, first of all, are they going to let him try and unseat Rasheed Walker at left tackle? And like he's been a fascinating player, Walker, because you and I were there at training camp last year, and he looked horrendous. Like big athletic body, like looked the part of an NFL left tackle until the ball was snapped, and then it's like, ooh, that's going to be an issue. And then as the season, very quickly, like he looked pretty good, and as the season wore on, he improved, and particularly as a pass blocker, by the end of the year, like he looked like a pretty good player. So given the kind of his youth and how new he is to starting, I would be reluctant to take him out of the starting lineup based off last season. I would want to see what he can do in year two. You've got Elton Jenkins, who's bounced all around that offensive line, played like pretty much every spot. Zach Tom, who's emerged as this really nice right tackle. But then you've got this guy, Jordan Morgan. You're like, well, what do we do with him? Do we try and let him unseat Rasheed Walker? Do we plug him in at one of the guard spots, move Elton Jenkins? Do we plug him in and not move Elton Jenkins? Like, where do we put this guy that we drafted? And the Packers have had this sort of history of taking these guys, college tackles and then kicking them inside to guard. They've done it enough that it feels like it must be by design, like it's an actual feature of the way they draft offensive linemen, that they like the guys that have played a tackle in college for whatever reason. Maybe it's the play in space, the footwork, whatever. They seem to prefer that than sort of taking designated interior offensive linemen and keeping them there. But like Jordan Morgan, I think is a big X factor in this offensive line, because I think so far we don't really know what the plan is with him, and that almost dictates the rest of the thing.
Yeah, I feel like the Packers are becoming that team that you're almost just trusting. Just like you're trusting Shanahan to create good offense. Again, Matt LaFleur, I think, was in his bag last year, proving, hey, I wasn't just Aaron Rodgers, right? Matt LaFleur was the guy that coincided with Aaron Rodgers' ascent back to MVP caliber level. And then he takes Jordan Love and develops him into what looks like a potential star. And they've got this slew of receivers and these revolving door of offensive linemen and multi-position players, and they're making it all work. So we're putting the Packers at 14 here, and I wonder how much of that is just trust in the Packers and their ability to draft and develop players.
And we talked before about how the Shanahan coaching tree seems to have like a magic wand when it comes to offensive line, that they're able to hide issues or what look like issues on paper. That doesn't seem to be true for the Sean McVay coaching tree, or at least the most obvious example of it not being true is with McVay's offense in particular. Like, his offense is absolutely affected by the offensive line way more than any Shanahan variant. LaFleur is in this interesting spot, though, where, which coaching tree does he belong to, right? Because he's been part of all of it, right? Yeah, so what I'm saying is we've got this Green Bay offense where you look at the line, you say, on paper, that's maybe a little bit worse than this ranking, but we've seen it sort of outperform what expectations maybe. I mean, maybe that is part of what we've been crediting to the Shanahan offensive scheme, that Miami, Houston, San Francisco, all of those lines are going to play better than their personnel says they should. Maybe that's true in Green Bay as well, that this LaFleur version of this McVay-Shanahan offensive system is of the Shanahan ilk in terms of protecting or inflating or artificially boosting the play of their offensive linemen.
All right, let's get to the top 10 here, Sam. Counting down from 10, we've got the Dallas Cowboys at number 10. Pittsburgh Steelers are 9. At number 8, it's the Buffalo Bills. Number 7, the Kansas City Chiefs. And number 6, the Atlanta Falcons. Before we get into the top 5, who from that group stands out to you here?
Well, I think Dallas is a really interesting offensive line because they've let players walk, right? And they need to replace those players. I mean, Tyron Smith actually had the first sort of significantly healthy season he's had in a while last year. And okay, he still missed a bit of time, but like, he showed that he's still a top tier left tackle. They let him walk, and now they basically need to replace him with a low first round rookie in Tyler Guyton, and a guy who, you would have heard the word raw or potential or whatever used about Tyler Guyton a lot. If he's not able to step in and be a top tier player right away, they have trouble because the alternative at that spot is Chuma Edoga. And we know he's nowhere near the level of Tyron Smith. So that's a potential issue. Same at center. Like, they've let Tyler Biadasz walk to Washington, and now Cooper Beebe, another rookie, can he step in right away? If not, they're dealing with Brock Hoffman, which again is a significant step backward. So this is a real test for Dallas. Have been arguably the best drafting team in the NFL over the last several years. Well, now they've got 2 spots, and they need to go 2 for 2, basically, for this offensive line to stay a top-level unit.
On one hand, you say, well, just trust Jerry and the boys, right? Trust them when it comes to first-round offensive linemen, because in the past decade plus, we've seen Tyron Smith. We've seen Zach Martin. We saw Travis Frederick for a period of time, where he became one of the best centers in the NFL. And we've seen Tyler Smith just all become not just good starters. I mean, Tyler Smith is probably the worst of that group. And we're looking at probably one of the best left guards in the NFL right now of these former first-round picks. But again, to me, Tyler Guyton was a completely different style player than all those other guys. You're going to throw the developmental tag on him, but he never had the college production he looked like multiple years of developmental time. So that's going to be an interesting one, I think, for Dallas. So they're almost coming from this position of multiple years of strength, right? They had been a top 5-ish offensive line pretty much for the last 8 or 10 years here, Sam. And they're still looking at a top 10 ranking right now because they have Tyler Smith, because they have Zach Martin, and presumably Terrence Steele not playing as poorly as he did last year, right? There's previous evidence that he could be pretty good. And then you have a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers almost going the other way, where they're up in this mix because of additions, right? The Steelers have not been one of the better offensive lines over the past few years. They had a stretch where they were the epitome of just be solid on the offensive line, have 5 solid starters. They did that for a while. They took a massive step back over the last few years. But now with their 3 out of their top 5 draft picks all being offensive linemen, to go with solid starters at at least 3 positions, and developmental prospects at the other 2, the Steelers creeping into the top 10 here because of some of their youth and potential.
Yeah, absolutely. That Steelers offensive line will be a fun one. And again, I feel like that's a group that could improve with a change in scheme as well. You would expect them to be replacing Dan Moore at that left tackle spot. He's been the weakest link of that group, particularly anytime he has to face Myles Garrett, which is twice a year. I would expect that Steelers offensive line to look pretty good this year. One other group in this sort of bottom half of the top 10 to talk about is Kansas City. Because this is like the same line that they've had in terms of they threw all the resources at it after that Super Bowl. Never again. Patrick Mahomes will be protected. And now they have concerns at the tackle positions, particularly left tackle. Okay, Jawan Taylor, they're paying a ton of money. He's going to be there at right tackle. We'll just see how he plays relative to last season, which was a bad year for him. But left tackle now is like a battle between Wanya Morris and Kingsley Suamataia, the rookie. They're a classic team where, okay, remember last year they fairly late in the day signed Donovan Smith to come in and start at left tackle after pitching the idea of Jawan Taylor at left tackle. Like that was the late in the day veteran solution. I wonder if they're primed for another stopgap at left tackle. Like maybe they'll play out the Wanya Morris versus Suamataia battle, or maybe they will sign one of these veterans that's available. Like a guy like Charles Leno, right? Not exciting, not great.
Is he retired?
I don't think so, right? He's still
or
available.
Retiring. There was talk about retirement.
Right, but would you?
Leno.
I think you could talk him out of it for a shot at a Super Bowl, like a three-peat. Hey, Charles, we're the Super Bowl favorites. You want to come back for a run?
I mean, Charles is. This happened with the Bears. It happened with the Commanders. I think the fans. He's the classic guy that maybe struggles with some really good players at times, but is just so consistent year over year. You know what you're going to get. Probably better pass blocker than run blocker. I think Charles Leno. It elevates that offensive line so that you don't have the question mark. You don't have former second year third rounder or first year second rounder, rookie second rounder. You don't have that question mark. That's what they did with Donovan Smith last year. And look, when Donovan Smith went down and Wanya Morris took over, that was part of that late season lull, the Christmas Day issues that the Chiefs had. That was part of their late season offensive lull. The Chiefs are so stout on the interior. I mean, I would still be leaning toward thinking about a veteran there just to shore up left tackle while those other guys are developing.
Yeah.
The Falcons are the other interesting one to me because for all the talk about Arthur Smith, because they were so run heavy, I do think he protected the offensive line a little bit more than others as far as like in our grading and everything. So when the new system comes in and Zach comes in, calling plays in a McVay type of system, is there going to be too much pressure on, say, Caleb McGarry at right tackle, who's become a mauling right tackle and really developed over the last couple of years? Another poster child for like wait 3 or 4 years and see if these guys can develop before giving up on them. McGarry's production has just really improved over the last few years. Drew Dahlman at center last year took a big step forward. They're expecting something similar from Matthew Bergeron in year 2 after he moved from left tackle to left guard as a rookie coming out of Syracuse. Jake Matthews has just been very dependable for the last decade at left tackle, but is there going to be just more pressure on this offensive line? Maybe an extra 100 or so pass blocking snaps in true pass sets. There's going to be a little bit more of a challenge here for the Falcons, a team that our grading has really liked over the last couple of years.
Yeah, they're the opposite of a few teams we talked about before where we're expecting some kind of change in baseline performance based off external circumstances changing, and the question is how much, right? So with Chicago, we expected to get it better because Justin Fields is no longer the quarterback. With, a couple of these other teams, we talked about that. Like Atlanta's the other way around, where you change away from that offense. Even forget the sort of intricacies and idiosyncrasies of that Arthur Smith offense. The fact that it was the most run-heavy offense in football is now no longer the case, right? So that almost certainly makes this offensive line's job harder. The question is how much, and that's difficult to answer. But I think you're right. Like it's definitely going to be harder this year to maintain their spot. But I mean, Chris Lindstrom is arguably the best guard in the NFL right now. Drew Dahlman has been good. Jake Matthews is good. Like minimum, you're talking about 3 out of the 5 spots are good. Caleb McGarry is more of a question mark because, as you said, his thriving coincided with that like freakishly run-heavy offense, and it was a perfect synergy there with that Arthur Smith system. Is it going to look as good for him in particular in a different system? Who knows? And then Matthew Bergeron, the kind of the projection question mark. But yeah, I think it's a solid group, but I agree that like this is where you start getting into they're ranked very high, league wide, and it's a case of do they deserve to be that high? But then, as we're going to get to, like there aren't that many teams you would say clearly are going to be better than them, even factoring in some kind of potential regression.
All right, let's get to that top five. Mentioned it earlier. At number 5, it's the New York Jets. Number 4, the Cleveland Browns. Number 3 is the Indianapolis Colts. Number 2, the Philadelphia Eagles. And the number 1 offensive line heading into the 2024 NFL season, it is the Detroit Lions. Let's go team by team in this top 5 here, starting with the Jets at 5. Is this valid? Did they do enough this offseason to go from, almost worst to first as far as offensive line rankings go?
So when I first saw the rankings and it's like the Jets are 5, my initial reaction is, that's crazy. That's clearly a mistake. Because people sort of throw in these rankings and they're like, hey, this is my first run at this. What should change? Who should be higher? Who should be lower? Looking for feedback. And my initial reaction is like, the Jets at 5 is ridiculous. Come on, that's a joke. And then you kind of look into it and you're like, I could see it. Okay, Tyron Smith, we talked about before with Dallas. He showed last year he's still a top-tier left tackle when he's healthy. Now, obviously, when he's healthy is a big concern for him, but they did a great job, I think, in the draft of bringing in Olu Fashanu from Penn State, who is, honestly, he reminded me of Tyron Smith with his footwork, with his movement skills, with his ability to mirror in pass protection. And now he's going to be getting a ton of practice reps because Tyron Smith won't be. He's going to get it's a perfect landing spot for him. And I think if they need him for 5-6 games this year, they're not in bad shape. The great Morgan Moses at right tackle now. Elijah Vera Tucker is a good player. And then you've just got the projection of Joe Tippmann at center and then what John Simpson can be coming over. I think it's still a little high. Atlanta, we just talked about, even with their potential unknown of how much they're going to take a step back. Kansas City, even without a left tackle, you would say the other 4 are probably deserving of being better than this overall. But they're thereabouts. I think this is clearly a top 10 unit now. And then the question is, can they push as high as this?
Yeah, I think the proxy for this would be the team that is at number 3, the Indianapolis Colts. If we think about last year's Colts, they were coming off a 2022 season where, remember, Sam Ehlinger started some games and Matt Ryan was playing football for the Colts, and their offensive line was bad. And it was because they had Bernard Ryman have to fill in as a rookie. They had all these injuries, and the O-line just felt completely overwhelmed in 2022. And you and I sat here on this show last summer saying, the last thing we saw was a bad Colts offensive line. However, they have all the pieces to be a pretty good offensive line. And that's what they did. They stayed healthy, and all the players that had previous production just played up to their previous production, other than maybe Quentin Nelson. He hasn't played at that elite Pro Bowl level. So I think the Jets are similar, right? We're coming off a season where they didn't look good on paper. Then they got even worse with the injuries, and they were horrible. But now on paper heading into the season, I think the Jets look much better, and I think that probably deserving of being here at number 5.
Yeah, I think it's definitely arguable. I still think maybe it's a little aggressive, but as I said, my initial reaction is that's crazy. And then I think when you look into it, you're like, okay, it's not crazy. It might be a touch higher than they deserve, but this shows you what you can do. If you really attack a unit, you can go from terrible to better than average pretty quickly.
Yeah, and the thing I'm going to point out about the Jets, like I said about the Bengals, the fact that the Bengals have a first-round offensive tackle who is not starting or not needed to start. The Jets have that with Olu Fashanu, and then the number 4 team, the Cleveland Browns, the fact that they have 3 starting caliber tackles. Jedrick Wills at left tackle, Jack Conklin coming back off injury, potentially playing right tackle, with DeJuan Jones, who filled in at right tackle last year and was excellent as a rookie, especially a mid-round rookie. The depth that the Browns have, they've been a top 5 offensive line for a while here, and then you throw in one of the best interior groups, Joel Bitonio at left guard, Ethan Pocic at center, and Wyatt Teller at right guard. The Browns have depth, and they have just a good group of starters as well.
Yeah, I think this is a top 3 offensive line. Jack Conklin is a top-level player. I would like to see them give DeJuan Jones a chance to unseat Jedrick Wills at left tackle, honestly. DeJuan Jones showed last year that he should be playing, and he's not, because I think the best of the 3 right now is Jack Conklin. And when he's healthy, it makes sense to give him, he didn't lose his starting job by getting injured, right? So I think it makes sense to keep him as the right tackle. But that leaves DeJuan Jones, who showed last year that he could be really good sitting on the bench because you don't want to move him to the other side. I would give him a shot. And okay, maybe it might not work, right? You might go through training camp or preseason or whatever and go, that guy is a train wreck at left tackle. He can only play right tackle. Forget it. Move him back there. Fine. Put him on the bench. But Jedrick Wills is underachieved as a first round, as the answer at left tackle. I don't think he's a long-term answer for them at left tackle, at which point I would see if DeJuan Jones can do that. I mean, Chris Collinsworth on the draft show last year was like, I think DeJuan Jones can be a left tackle. So we discovered last year he's already an NFL caliber player. He showed that. He's better than a lot of people expected him to be. He slipped in the draft for whatever reason, but he already exceeded those expectations. So let's see if he can defy expectations again and give him a shot to win the left tackle job. Because if DeJuan Jones is an upgrade over Wills at left tackle, I mean, this might be the best offensive line in the NFL at that point, because you've got, I think, the best guard tandem in the NFL. Ethan Pochich at center is good. Jack Conklin is better than good at right tackle. And then you've just got Jedrick Wills at left tackle who could be upgraded upon. I mean, I would give that a shot to happen.
The one interesting thing about DeJuan Jones at 6'8", 370 plus or whatever he is, he did not play like this mauling right tackle. I think the lack of foot speed and ability to move actually affected him quite a bit in the run game. You see that discrepancy in his pass blocking versus run blocking grades. He was excellent in games going head-to-head with TJ Watt. I mean, he is really difficult to get around. You can't bull rush him.
Right.
And he's athletic enough to just always be in position that you can't get around him, right? I mean, DeJuan Jones, I don't know whether it's left tackle or right tackle, I think will be okay in pass protection. My question is actually the run game for a guy that on paper, again, you'd be like, oh, he's 6'8", 370. He's a road grader. And he's actually not at the moment because I think the lack of athleticism has caught up so far. So as he's growing into that, he has a chance to become a really good player. And I think that, again, that's why. And Jack Conklin, even at this point in his career, I think is still a viable starting right tackle when he's healthy. And that's why the Browns are so high here. And you actually want to put them even higher because of some of this depth here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good offensive line. I think definitely one of the best in the NFL and a strength of this team.
Indianapolis Colts at 3. Again, I mentioned last year at this time coming off a terrible season, and we reminded people they still have Quentin Nelson at left guard. They still have Ryan Kelly at center. They still have Braden Smith at right tackle. We're high on Bernard Ryman at left tackle. And all of those guys, again, pretty much came good. Nelson has never really gotten back to that Zach Martin caliber level where you're seeing these high 80s, low 90s grades, Hall of Fame trajectory for his career. Still a very good player, maybe taking a step back just from that trajectory. But Ryan Kelly coming off a really good season at center. Braden Smith has been one of the better right tackles over the last few years. So, yeah, 4 out of 5 spots I think we're feeling pretty good about for the Colts.
Yeah, no, definitely. Again, like that Carolina offensive line, it was a line that never should have been as bad as it ended up getting to, and some of that was injury-related. But last year it showed that it can piece together a very good group again. Bernard Ryman, Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly, Braden Smith, that's 4 out of 5 are very minimum above average and pretty good. And then you just got what is Will Fries at right guard. And Ryman in particular is very young in terms of not just his time in the NFL, but his time playing football, period, and playing offensive line. His development is by no means finished at this point. He could be getting even better and improving. Nelson is a question. Why? Okay, injuries obviously played a factor in his decline from his first 3 years in the NFL. He might have been as good as it got at any position. And then he declined a bit, got injured, and he's just never come back to that level again, in part because, sure, the offensive line around him wasn't as good. But we've kind of reached the point where you would have expected Nelson to have gone back to being a truly elite player at left guard, and that hasn't happened yet. I don't know if that guy is coming back.
I think Nelson's ruining all of my O-line age curve and trajectories and everything, right? I mean, again, let's work under the basis that you trust the PFF grading, that it's at least getting you in the ballpark here. 81.6 as a rookie in 2018. That is an outstanding rookie season for a guard. Then a 91, 87.5, and then since that point, Nelson's has gone down to 69, 68, and 70. So it's the first 3 years really consistent at this elite guard level. The last 3 years very consistent at just a solid guard level. And Quentin Nelson, as a prospect, we used to always say, Sam, he has it all, right? The tape people love him. The analytics people love him. He's a great run blocker. He can run block in every type of situation. He'll put you on the turf and bury you, and he's an excellent pass protector. And we've just seen far more inconsistency in the run game over these last couple of years from Nelson, losing far more blocks. So I don't have a great explanation. He was number 1 in PFF WAR among guards in his first 3 NFL seasons, including as a rookie. Just incredible. I mean, it looked like, hey, he is in the PFF era, Zach Martin, Marshall Yanda, right? Like those are the 2 best guards. And it looked like Quentin Nelson had a chance to surpass those guys. And we've just seen that level off a little bit, where he's still a good player. He's still fine, but he is not at that elite level that he had been the first 3 years of his career.
No, definitely. And I think I would like to see that guy come back. Obviously, the Colts would as well. I don't know if it's happening, though.
All right, let's get to the number 2 team, the Philadelphia Eagles. To me, this is similar as the Cowboys, right? Similar to the Cowboys, where they used to be higher. They used to be even better. They're still here near the top, but they're one more replacement, right? Last year it was at guard, losing Isaac Seumalo. This year it's Jason Kelce retiring, and the same guy is going to replace him. It's Cam Jurgens moving from guard to center. So now you have the 3 out of 5, Jordan Mailata at left tackle, Lane Johnson at right tackle, Landon Dickerson at left guard. Feeling really good about those guys, especially the tackles. But 2 question marks now. Cam Jurgens moving to center and Tyler Steen likely stepping in at right guard. Still a very good offensive line, but with 1 extra question mark now compared to last year.
Yeah, I mean, this was the best offensive line in the NFL for a couple of years. They were pillar to post, I think, maybe 2 years in a row, pillar to post, the best offensive line in the NFL. Like, they started off preseason offensive line rankings number 1, every single week offensive line ranking number 1, and then finished the year offensive line ranking number 1. But more turnover this year. And obviously, it doesn't get more significant than losing, a future Hall of Fame center in Jason Kelce and trying to replace a player that good. That's a massive question mark. Now, Cam Jurgens steps in there after playing right guard last year. You look at his grade and it's like it's average at best, but Cam Jurgens was drafted to be Jason Kelce's replacement, right? He's almost a Kelce clone in terms of that sort of undersized center, lighter than you like, athletic, very mobile, and that it's not, right guard is not his position. Like, his position was center, but obviously you're not going to unseat Jason Kelce to get him playing time. This is when we're going to find out what Cam Jurgens actually is. Theoretically, it should be better than he was at right guard, but there's a lot of space between a 61 grade and the kind of 90 grade that Jason Kelce is clocking in year after year after year. I would expect him to split that difference somewhere, but who knows where, right? Does he come in at 70, 75, 80, whatever? That's an unknown. And then Tyler Steen, at right guard, the other unknown. The other 3 spots, though, Lane Johnson might be the best right tackle in the NFL and has been for years. Nobody has a tougher assignment than him on a per snap basis. The dude never gets help. The line is consistently sliding in the other direction. He's just left on an island to take care of his job and always does. And then Jordan Mailata has become a really, really top tier left tackle as well. And then Landon Dickerson is a really good player at left guard. So 3 out of the 5 spots locked in, rock solid. The 4th, question mark, but I think probably ends up reasonably well. I think, if anything, the loss of Kelce will be felt the most in the organizational part of it. That the veteran presence, just understanding, having been there for so many years. Like, now you're going to start to get an idea of how many things a center has to take care of in the NFL when he's not there. That's probably where it gets felt more than like the down-to-down blocking of what he does. And then you've got 1 out of the 5 spots potentially being, a real question mark.
I think you did a good job summing a lot of that up. The other name I just want to throw out there is the 3rd offensive tackle being Mekhi Becton, former first rounder who's dealt with injury issues, but still played over 1,000 snaps last year. Never really lived up to his potential as, the number 11 overall pick, 6'7", 360, had that really special combine, but again, injuries. And you're going to Philadelphia where, look, they don't hit on every single offensive lineman, right? They drafted Andre Dillard and let him walk as a former first rounder. But Becton, with his size and potential as their 3rd offensive tackle, some future Lane Johnson insurance maybe at right tackle, I think he's just another intriguing name to add to the mix where, again, I already think they'll be one of the best offensive lines, and at least 4 out of those 5 spots will look good. But I think OT3 has potential with Mekhi Becton there as well.
I mean, it's a great reclamation project for them, right? They have one of those difference-making, needle-moving offensive line coaches. So I'm all for it. Like, nobody ever doubted Mekhi Becton's talent. It's just injuries really took it, and maybe he'll never become anything because of it. But I'm all for giving, a guy like Stoutman somebody like Mekhi Becton. I mean, there are comparables, right, between the ball of clay that Jordan Mailata was when he rocked up and Mekhi Becton. Very different reasons, but he turned Jordan Mailata from a rugby player into a Pro Bowl caliber left tackle in very short order. I mean, Mekhi Becton was a first-round draft pick because of those physical tools. Injuries have really taken a hammer to his NFL career, but, here you go, Jeff. Have at it. Go to work.
All right, let's get to the Detroit Lions, the number 1 offensive line in the NFL. I think this was evident, watching them play the knows how to tap into these guys and their potential and put them in position to succeed. But the tackle duo of Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell. Give me your left guard pronunciation here, Sam, for all the people.
Glasgow, of course. It started getting in my head. Glasgow and Ragnow, right? Yeah.
It started getting in my head, though, because I always said it the right way, and you were like, you people here always say it the wrong way. Graham Glasgow at left guard, Frank Ragnow, one of the best centers. And then, look, I'm just team Kevin Zeitler, right? Until he completely falls off the ledge, you just drop Kevin Zeitler in at right guard on an offensive line, and as long as he's not the best or second best offensive lineman, you're in pretty good shape. Well, he's probably offensive lineman 5 on this group, but he can still play. And so adding Zeitler in at right guard, I think the Lions' offensive line is even better than they were last year when they were also one of the best in the league.
No, definitely. It is a little bit confusing when Glasgow and Ragnow are essentially spelled like they would be phonetically the same, but they're different.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, in large part because Ragnow, as far as I'm aware, is not a place, right? So it doesn't have a predefined pronunciation, right? Americans like to pronounce Glasgow like Ragnow, like Glasgow, and it's just not. There's a place.
No,
it's called Glasgow.
Place in Scotland.
That's what it's
a real
called.
Place.
So anyway, I think Taylor. This is a really good offensive line. There's no weakness, right? Every offensive line that we've talked about before has got at least one spot where you're like, there's none of that. I mean, the biggest question mark on this offensive line is Kevin Zeitler so old that he's going to stop playing well? And even if he does, they snag Christian Mahogany late in the draft, who we really like as a player that could step in and be solid. Now, that's a question mark, but that's like a question mark once removed as opposed to an obvious hole in the offensive line. This should minimum be, 5 capable starters, and one of them in Penei Sewell looks like an all-pro superstar. Like, this is a really good group.
Yeah, so you might have the best tackle in the NFL in Penei Sewell, right? As Trent Williams gets older, you might be talking about Sewell as the best tackle. You mentioned Lane Johnson as the best right tackle. Either way, like, Sewell's up in the top 1 or 2 right tackles, top 3 probably offensive tackles. Ragnow is one of the best centers in the NFL. I guess my only question for the Lions is probably depth, right? You have a guy like Dan Skipper who's stepped in at multiple positions and been fine, but they don't have that 6th guy like a former first rounder like an Olu Fashanu sitting there, or a DeJuan Jones technically as a 6th offensive lineman. That's the only thing that's lacking here. But as far as the starting 5, to your point, players that have been extremely productive and still look like, other than Zeitler, they're all in the prime of their career. Zeitler's the only one who's probably on the downside, but again, still a guy that grades in the green and has been doing it at a high level since 2012, since he entered the league. Extremely consistent. He has never not graded in the green in PFF history. So, yeah, the Lions are loaded, man.
Yeah, I mean, so look, there's Trent Williams, I think, is fairly entrenched as the best tackle in the NFL. If you remove Trent Williams, or you say, all right, in a post-Trent Williams landscape, there's several players, I think, that have a case. But Penei Sewell is definitely one of them. With Jason Kelce retiring, Ragnow is one of 2 players, I think, that would have a strong case to be the best center in the NFL. Creed Humphrey being the other one. Taylor Decker is a solid to better than solid. He's a good caliber left tackle. So you've got arguably a reasonable argument, but arguably the best center, the best right tackle, a good left tackle, and then 2 above average / good guards. I mean, that, and some depth in guys like Christian Mahogany. I mean, this is it's as good as it gets in the offensive line right now.
And then, like I said earlier, you throw in Ben Johnson calling the plays in the way, you'll see Penei Sewell out in space using his athleticism. You'll see these guys put into position to succeed. You'll have the 6th offensive lineman, Penei Sewell, catching passes in the flat. I mean, they're using these guys to their strengths as well and tapping into their strength and athleticism because they're all pretty good, man, up front. Not just in the regular run game and in pass protection, but also the versatility that they bring to the table. So love watching the Lions play football in part because of their offensive line and how they play. So I think they're the clear number 1 offensive line in the NFL.
Yep, definitely. I think with the as I said, the Eagles have been there for a couple of years. Detroit didn't get better than the Philadelphia standard we've seen from the last couple of years, but losing a Hall of Fame center and another question at right guard, I think drops Philadelphia below Detroit now.
Also, we've seen the Lions just build this team brick by brick. This group inherited Taylor Decker and Frank Ragnow, right? So they had those nice pieces in place, and then they had some issue. They draft Penei Sewell, so they became, 3 out of 5 are really good. Then they had guard issues for a couple of years, and it feels like they've shored those up with Glasgow's development and then bringing in Zeitler as a veteran. So nice job from a team-building aspect as well for the Lions to get. That's how they got here to be the number 1 offensive line in the NFL. So, all right, man. I mentioned earlier this week, we're not going to be recording on Thursday. Some very important full PFF company meetings throughout the week. That's going to push us from Thursday to Friday. But Friday, I'm excited, man. Hard Knocks has been on. It's the front office version for the New York Giants. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. It goes through their draft strategy, their free agent strategy, everything going, leading up to Saquon Barkley signing with the Eagles, their thought process there. I've got a lot of thoughts so far on Hard Knocks, and then we'll talk training camp battles as well.
Yeah, it's been pretty good this offseason. We've had 2 episodes now, right? And we'll have a 3rd by the time we do that show. So, yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, it should be fun. So thanks to everybody for tuning in here today. We'll see you again on Friday with more PFF NFL Podcast.